of Kabul. Was this the biggest disaster ever? You know? No. Alright, this is the anniversary. This is 2 years ago now. And so people are once again bent out of shape about withdrawing from Afghanistan and how this is the biggest blunder. And you know, I take actually the completely opposite view. I'll just say that I think as far as Biden withdrawing from Afghanistan, that this is maybe I consider this like one of the most presidential moves that anyone's really made in a long time. To have the decisiveness to just leave, just bail on a situation that nobody was concerned about anyway. And I mean, when people get bent out of shape, you know, I don't want to tell people, you know, if when someone's ranting about how withdrawing from Afghanistan is the biggest, you know, I don't want to tell them, you know, maybe they should have, you know, gone and fought in Afghanistan, but I might ask if they can name one single battle that took place in Afghanistan. Because frankly, nobody paid attention to this war the whole time it was going on. And if they did, it wouldn't have been run the way it was. And quite frankly, the whole reasons why this failed and what failed in Afghanistan was the nation building aspect of the global war on terror and the Afghan war. The other parts of it, there were problems as well. I think like Tora Bora, there were real problems with I think the way I read an account by Dalton Fury, alias a Delta Force guy, about how the Delta Force were tasked with getting Bin Laden, and it was really a cringe kind of book, and where you really wonder about the, you know, who would screw that up, getting Bin Laden, and they just seem very timid, and even just from their own account. And there were always problems from the get-go, because who else will do it? And there was nobody trying to really take I think there was a brief period with Obama where when Obama dedicated himself to it, to sending more troops. I think there was a brief period where him and Rahm Emanuel and the early Obama admin got kind of hyped about changing things, and this probably lasted about till General McChrystal was sacked, or so maybe a little, but then quickly, you know, or even to the as far as the Battle of Marja or something like that. But for the most part, nobody paid attention to Afghanistan, and most people did consider the nation-building aspects of it to be a huge joke, because you would look at it like it's all gonna fall apart. It's the same problems that the Russians ran into, where I mean, they when they showed up, they were trying to put women in schools and things, and but then they would the Afghans would chop off the Russian school teachers' heads, and, and so they'd complain. They had a similar experience, and so this is what the war should have showed, that the approach to it was highly misguided into thinking that, because if you look at it like the Afghans are just the same as any American, and you know, if you could create you could get these people national park jobs, park service jobs, and then things will work out. But it never came close to happening. So Biden took the unpopular call, because these are always calls that are going to be heavily criticized and nobody defends. And I don't really hear people defending Biden. I hear a lot of people make up a lot of stuff about making the whole situation seem a lot worse. And these are people who had no interest in the war in Afghanistan for years and have no idea what even transpired in said country. And it's funny now because Afghanistan is trillions of dollars, and no one cared. No one paid attention to how much money that was costing. When we got like nothing out of it, whereas we have a situation now where our military situation with Ukraine is we're spending very little and getting a ton out of it, as the Russian army is being destroyed, hence eliminating a need for bigger military in the future. In a way, um, the Afghan thing used trillions of dollars. No one paid any attention to it. If people did, the war might have went differently. And but it it just went on until and Trump said that he would pull the troops out, but he never did. And the reason why is there was always an advisor to tell him. There was always some military person. I mean, this would be what the real entrenched deep state is, and this is what would thwart Trump. Where Biden, as people say, any advisor couldn't speak to him about the Afghan withdrawal. I mean, just to give credit where it's due, I think Biden did the right thing. And as much as people, they're gonna whine about it and take every opportunity to make you look bad, because the whole country's gonna collapse. But what else were you gonna do? And it made the most sense to pull out as fast as you can. And frankly, what happened is they set hard deadlines and stuck to them. And no matter what provocation, the Biden regime, Biden and his people. I mean, if this is Biden himself, or who has who is making the decisive call, or you could maybe, if you're going to argue with this, this could be an argument for why like the deep state just running running things is for the best. If things can just go automatically without a political thing being considered, because it's just going to look bad with the fall of Afghanistan. But I think you have to just go. This is the correct move. Just get out of there as quick as you can. We'd spent enough time, and there could have always been some other thing could have come up to keep us there longer. So it was good to just stick to the hard deadlines and just go. And as far as leaving equipment, the equipment that got left behind was for the army that we put in place, all the Afghans that we armed, the Afghan National Police and the army, which these are huge security forces that just collapsed. But what are you going to do? We gave them the means to do it, to defend them, but they didn't fight in the end. So what are you going to do? And I'll say that the people who began to complain the most around the time, the conservatives were just throwing, you're just saying everything why we should stay in Afghanistan longer. Basically, why we should make a more dragged out withdrawal. And they're complaining endlessly about getting all these people out, like the collaborators who, at this point, would have been critical to be fighting for the Afghan government. But before the fight even began, quite frankly, it became a big national concern to get all the people out. So obviously, any Afghan soldier, if he had the choice between continuing to be an Afghan soldier and fighting the Taliban, or just hopping on like a C-130 or something, or hopping on like some big cargo military cargo jet and getting out of it, and just living as a refugee in like Europe or America, there's hardly any choice at all for these people, and I mean, especially the amount of effort they put into be the Afghan national army. I mean, I've heard horror stories from the get-go, from 2008 and sooner even. I'd heard all kinds of especially about the Afghan National Police, and just how I mean how these people like we pretty much had the worst allies that we could have had in the Afghan National Police. And then all these conservatives are crying about how we need to get these people out so they can live as refugees, when a lot of these people had actually pedophile practices. You know, I'm not making this up. This is what I mean. I've heard from people guarding the ANP police stations, Marines, who said that this was going on. And I mean, this is widely known, but I've heard firsthand. And in 2008, I heard a lot. And so I mean, it's not a good ally that we. As soon as you have the wrong person. As much as the people on our side, I mean, not to say that they're all the same, but there wasn't any Afghan identity. The situation wasn't going to work out. Whereas in a way, in Iraq, it did. The U.S. military is still in Iraq, by invitation, because after we left, they figured they had it. But the situation there is you have Shiites who figured out that it's very helpful to them to have the U.S. military on their side if anything is going to happen. The Afghan situation is different. There's however many Afghans who are bummed out that the regime fell, but these probably weren't the same people willing to fight for it. And so this is a huge, I mean, you assess the situation and you move on. I mean, I I think it was absolutely correct to knock out the Taliban in the first place, where they did have Bin Laden, and they're giving, and before 9/11 they'd already had however much prestige from hosting big international terrorists, and I mean what the U.S. had no idea necessarily how to respond to 9/11, and I think it was more than worthwhile to attack Afghanistan, but maybe it wasn't. It made little sense after that to rebuild Afghanistan, where no one even asked for it necessarily, and there's just no point. And so I think hopefully the U.S. learned a lesson in how to fight a war, and in some ways you're seeing where it has come to, like dealing with ISIS, for instance, where the U.S. just bombed cities to the ground, like Raqqa in Syria, where I mean, there's no real reason to, the U.S. is saying right now, how would we even rebuild it? And maybe this is the best way to go. certainly Afghanistan, we stuck around for however long. We did a great job at you know at eliminating terrorists. Some of the last things we did were say even Zawahiri, Dr. Z, returned to Afghanistan and was killed. So it almost nicely wraps the whole thing up. The worst part was certainly with the getting the people out of Afghanistan, and then the Marines. I think 13 who were killed, and in by the Islamic State of Khorasan, ISK. So in some of the, and this is during the evacuation, like the emergency evacuation to get as many people out of there. The interpreters and so, but I, you make a huge problem, and it's conservatives who really are largely to blame. They're making a huge problem that more interpreters that instead of fighting for the Afghan government, that they should be, anyone who helped the U.S. should get. In fact, I'd argue that nobody helped the U.S. necessarily, unless you directly help the U.S. catch terrorists guilty of 9/11. The rest of it was the U.S. helping Afghanistan. So any Afghan collaborators and with the public government, they we're not in debt to them. We did enough. So to me, it only got absurd that there's people began calling that we needed to airlift all these people out. I think it was a different situation than say in Vietnam, where I think it was correct to airlift however many people out. But in Afghanistan, the people got a bit ahead of themselves, demanding an airlift when they should have actually been fighting a bit longer. In fact, the Kabul fell during the airlift, and the U.S. still just it's like the fall of it's like the British are leaving Gallipoli or something, where the Turks aren't even bothering to fire. The Taliban just waited for everyone to go, and that was it. There wasn't a big battle. They just waited for the U.S. to fly everyone out. The U.S. adhered to every deadline, was out, and then they declared victory on at the end of the month. So I mean, this is correct. The other side was weak and wouldn't fight. What would have been the point to just stick around any longer than that? And it was the most absurd thing, and this is what got those Marines killed. And it was almost symbolic of everything that was wrong with the whole war on terror. That these guys were left totally exposed while to getting in this pointless mission to get all these people out that people demanded, and then they're blown up by the suicide bomber that also blew up like 200 Afghans, and including Taliban and refugees, and it's just a huge mess of a situation. And then after that, there's a few more. I mean, it's somewhat just the way it played out. Even the airstrikes after, some hit ISIS people, ISK, and some hit civilians or so. And then you hit Zawahiri with the knife bomb, the Dr. Z. This is pretty much the end. Taliban takes over the government. Who cares? Like it's no big loss. We weren't there for resources or anything, despite what is claimed. Like we need the lithium deposits, and when we found lithium deposits, we were happy that there might be something to get it, like for like a future for the Afghan people, but it just turned out to be completely pointless. Most people could hardly give a rip, and then but they'll complain about what a disaster it was. And part of the big thing was some goofy Lord Miles, some fruity, this British guy who just goes to like disaster areas and hangs out like and he's kidnapped by the Taliban right now because he goes back to Afghanistan and just presents the Taliban as like these wacky guys. And everything I know about Afghan is it's just a horrible situation, and just just a terrible place. And the Taliban are hardly they're not just wacky fun guys with weird beliefs or whatever. They don't really see themselves that way. But if they're the people who whatever they have, you might just say it's just their way. It's a primitive place, and the only civilizational thing they have is like their religion and their brand, that kind of the kind of Islam brand. Yeah, I mean, that's all they have, so that's what they cling to. And the Taliban is just that. So, I mean, this isn't a good development, but as far as if we need to go, if terrorism becomes a problem in this place, you just bomb it out again, and you don't need to stick around to do the nation building and the girl schools and so on. I mean, if these people would have stuck around if these people had it in them, if they had like the grit or something to actually fight, like with the Ukrainians, or so we actually have that. It is nice to because we've had our many allies who don't work out at all. The Afghans, the Afghan situation just, I mean, I just think it needs to be said that Biden, for whatever, not that he's, I mean, just as far as this issue goes, I'll just give credit where it's due. I think Trump could have done the same. He could have just pulled everything out. It could be argued too that it wasn't the biggest deal to just leave a small residual force, because there were hardly any casualties in Afghanistan for years and years. And this much is true, that we kept a small force there, and this was enough to call it whatever. But I mean, to me, if you're not going to really, let's say you go all the way with these things, or you just pack it in. At some point, I think it was a good call to be made to just pack it in. If we don't have all the, if the Afghan puppet soldiers are like no good, they don't have good morale, they don't really fight, they're not really hitters, and the Taliban just run circles around these people. What's the point? They're just gonna fall to these people eventually. It just isn't. Maybe the country belongs to who fights for it. So it's whatever. I mean, part of the thing is that so far it's kind of assumed that the Taliban won't become a international terrorist problem. If it does, you just go there and you don't necessarily deal with it in the same way. But no, I think Biden did very well. I don't think we should have got more people out of Afghanistan. They weren't. I mean, they have the government they deserve, and the same could be said about us. We don't have the greatest government. We have an evil government, but so do they, and so they could have maybe shaped it in one way or another. I'm convinced that what people can do it, even people in the U.S. sphere. You see who kind of takes power, and the U.S. will accommodate regimes like Saudi Arabia. Or you don't necessarily tell them they have to change. Iraq is the same. Iraq is absolutely a U.S. client state, and but they're not necessarily asked to. This is a state that has for a time was very much a Shiite supremacist. It was like a Shiite government, Now, supposedly it's not. There's however many reforms, but these things function. But Afghanistan, no, there's no arrangement to be had, and just no point, no national interest in sticking around. So the biggest disaster was the Marines but the reason why they were there was because people demanded that we get all these refugees out of there. Because for what? And I don't even. How many of them that didn't get out were like executed by the Taliban or so? And a lot of the people complain about U.S. citizens who were left behind in Afghanistan, that they're acting like these are like it's not like a HVAC contractor or something from like Ohio. Like these are people with like dual citizenship. These are like Afghans with U.S. citizenship that didn't care that that the U.S. withdrew because they could just get a flight later, And then the people who are the people who are just hanging onto planes and who fell off of planes and stuff. The reason why, like they just saw it as a ticket to live as a refugee in the U.S. for like the rest of their life. That's the only, but now they don't have to go through the same process. It's not like the Taliban would have just blew them away. Maybe there's a few people who that happened to for some reason or another. I don't even I don't necessarily think that they didn't just reconcile with a lot of the people who worked with. Certainly, and I've heard, and I know from just looking at the Taliban stuff, like they just completely reappropriate a lot for themselves. Like a lot of the people who we trained to fly helicopters maybe are still are just now working for the Taliban. Not to say that they have a big helicopter fleet. Give me a break. But like the ANP is still the ANP. It's like just the Taliban ANP. And so they probably took more or less a lot of the personnel that the U.S. trained, who maybe were just infiltrators from the beginning, because there was however much of that going on. The Afghanistan is not a place where you don't have there's just nothing that's gonna they're not gonna you're not gonna turn the place into something. There's no resources or money, and Pakistan is the same as well. There's like compared to like some place like Iran or something. There's no resources. There's nothing. There's just just look at the fact sheets and stuff for like a minute, and you figure out how poor these countries are. There's nothing there, and then the people have no interest in being anything but like just the poorest mountain peasant. Because I mean, it's just what they like. It's not. I'm not saying it's you know, it's just what they're into. Just leave them to it. This is the problem with the war. The problem wasn't that the U.S. was taking resources from people, or that the U.S. was like killing millions of people, or so, or that the U.S. was killing hundreds of thousands, or whatever. The problem with this war was the humanitarian and nation-building aspects of it, which had no. I mean, why does that need to factor into 9/11? Because you could say that the undercut the root cause of terrorism or something, but that's not the way to do it. If we learn something, I hope going forward. I shouldn't even say that because I have very little hope going forward. Because there's very little sense about this whole matter, about any of All I really hear is that people are very unhappy with like the Afghan withdrawal for reasons I find hard to explain. But you talk to anybody who's really upset about Afghan, they could tell you very little about the war because they never paid attention. And this is why The news figured this out, that the war doesn't, the ratings don't, people lose their attention very quick, and people comment about this stuff now. Why isn't there so much coverage? People didn't really cover the stuff. I mean, people didn't stop partying after 9/11 in America, or during at any point of the whole war on terror. Did anyone consider? There wasn't a single canceled beach party in America during the whole Afghan war, and until we withdrew from it, and then and there's however much butthurt, especially just from conservatives, and I've heard people I've heard libtards upset about it as well, but they just have no idea, because they themselves have no idea about like military anything, so they couldn't even begin to defend any of these kind of calls. But I think, and personally, I think Biden, I think Brandon himself, it probably is the man he made. I think he just had enough, and somebody had to make the call, and he did it, and they stuck to deadlines. I think he deserves the credit. If Trump did it, I'd give him the credit. I don't think it's good that the Taliban are in charge, but it's just they're not in charge of really anything. If the place isn't a hideout for terrorists, it's it's not the biggest problem. But I think just to revisit some of just the way that things get out of perspective, and especially that how much the war costs. The people who never paid attention to it and then are just upset, and probably will continue to be upset for the next couple weeks. You could list a few anniversaries or so, and on this whole timeline from Afghanistan. And what I'd like people to get out of it is just to reorientate their approach to warfare and its cost benefit, and maybe if we got 9/11 again, our approach could be a little bit different. We could just show up without any nation building aspect to our program. So in the future, maybe we'll see what we do. But just to revisit the Afghan withdrawal, the Afghan pullout.